Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guest today is Elizabeth Booth, and I met Elizabeth in Chicago at H&H Americas. We chatted, hung out a little bit, watched the fashion show or two or three, and became friends. And so welcome to my channel.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
It's so good to see you again. Well,
Likewise.
let's go like to the beginning, right? Like tell me
Sure.
about like when knitting became part of your life or crochet. I know you crochet as well, right?
Yes, I started with crochet actually. And it was right after I had moved to California. So that would have been about 15, 18 years ago. And my dad had just died, and I was lonely. Like I just moved across the country and my kids were super small. And um, a girl from my church just asked me if I wanted to come to her little fiber group. And I thought, well, why not? Like I'll just give it a try. Maybe I'll make some friends, learn something new.
Right.
And she taught me how to crochet. And it was like this ugly brown, it was that lily cotton sugar and cream. I mean, I honestly hated that yarn. It was so ugly, but I just found that it really helped me focus. Like if I couldn't sleep at night, I could, sit and work on my hands with my hands and, make something. I would have something at the end of it. And then, I went to Michael's the next day and I bought a bunch of the cheap junk, but I loved all the colors. And, I started seeing all the different things you could make, like blankets or clothes or shawls and things like that. And I just fell into it.
Well,
And
I've
then I
heard
saw
of you like you lost the sleep one day, the first day, because you were afraid to forget how to do the stitch.
oh, yes.
Practicing all night.
Yes, that night I did go home and I must have been up till like 3 or 4 in the morning because I was like, we're not meeting again until next week. And, I really love this. Like, I want to do this and I don't want to forget how to do it. So, yeah, I stayed up and practiced and went to Michael's the next day so I could get some more yarn and do some more practice.
Anybody in your family did any fiber arts like when you were growing up?
My mom did a long time ago, and she's a quilter. So she's more into quilting. And I remember growing up, like I wanted to be a fashion designer. And so I wanted her to teach me how to sew. And then, sewing is very technical because it's almost like you have to think from the inside out. And when
Right.
I was 13, I just wanted to sketch cool outfits and make them, but I wasn't so much into like the whole technical side of it. And then when I had my kids, my son was the sort of baby where I could literally vacuum the entire floor and turn around and he would have found a pin to choke on.
Oh my God.
So I had to give up sewing. So that's kind of where, my kids were small at the time I learned to crochet and then to knit shortly after. And it just became like a really great thing for me because it's so portable, whereas with sewing, you have to have the setup and space to cut your fabric and all that stuff.
Right.
So yeah, the portability of it and just the safety of it, like, it just became a thing. And then when I started working in a yarn shop,
No, no,
that
no,
really
wait,
got,
wait. Before you get to the yarn shop, you were also a designer, right? Like you were doing the graphic design
oh, yes,
for them.
that's what I went to school for. Yeah. So my official college degree was in visual communications.
Right.
Um, but I found like when I was actually working in the field that I wasn't really that happy as a graphic designer. Like I was doing a lot of corporate work. Like I remember working on this one project, it was an annual report, and it must have been a month that I was just glued to the computer with my computer screen blown up about 500%, like manually um, lining up all the zeros and all the numbers. Like the client was super picky. And I was like, this is not what I consider to be creative work. Like, this is tedium, tedium to the max.
When you decided to go to and work at the yarn shop, were you afraid at all? Because like when I imagine working in the yarn shop, like you in the position of an expert. Like if somebody comes to this shop, you need to know where all the yarn and what's good for their budget and what's good
Yes.
project. And if they, God forbid, have some problem in their project, you need to know how to fix it, or at least like know the person who can help.
Yes.
Were you scared at all?
I wasn't until my first day, and then I realized all that. Like people were coming in and asking me these questions, and I am so lucky that I had such a nice boss. Like she was so patient with me, and if I didn't know something, like I would ask her, and I must have asked her like every time someone came in that day, I had to go ask her something. And I'm like, it's a wonder that she kept me on after that first day. But luckily for me, she did. And then because of that, because you are answering those people's questions, you're learning yourself.
Right.
So I feel like I learned so much just being there, being in that atmosphere, and then helping people problem solve. Yeah, it was
Well,
definitely learning.
in the like when you started knitting and crocheting, right? You are a learner, you are a new person to that. So you're learning all this, like the single crochet and double crochet and all this
Oh,
basic.
yes.
How did you end up being a designer? Tell me that journey.
That kind of happened while I was at the shop. Like I got to the point where it was like I'm always trying to make a pattern, but then I want to change things in the pattern. And then people were like, why don't you just start designing? Like, if you're going to change the pattern anyway, you should just make your own patterns.
Right.
And people liked my color combinations. So, they were kind of like, you should be a designer. And I thought, well, why not?
Well, tell me
And
about the first design.
so my first design was, I think it was Chevron Sands, which is actually still like one of my best sellers. And this was kind of like when all the gradients were just starting to come out. It seemed like there was a trend with gradients, and it just kind of popped in my head, like, why not have it gradate from one side and then do the opposite on the other side on the scarf, where you go from one to the other. And it really only took 2 balls of yarn, so it was very economical. But I also, like, when I was in that shop, I was working on Thursday afternoons, which is usually like a more quiet time. So if I wasn't doing like, the odds and ends that she might want done, I could sit and work on projects as well. And it was kind of just looking at the colors on the wall and whatever, like it got the wheels spinning. And I still love color. Like it just inspires me. Like I get excited looking at colors. Yeah.
Well, the hardest thing about working in yarn store, as far as I can see, is not to take everything home with you. Tell me about personal yarn stash and how did it change over the years, if any?
Oh, it's almost embarrassing because I do have a very large stash. I like Stephen West's comment about it that, we curate a collection. I go with that. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. But my stash has changed in a way, I guess, of appreciating, the better quality yarns. Although I still have acrylic. I love to make blankets out of scrap stuff. I love going through the stash and then like pulling colors and trying to see what I can do with it.
Right.
But for the most part, like, I like to knit shawls or clothes. Like most of my design work is that kind of thing. So I do appreciate wool. And now that I have wool sheep, I've learned a lot more about the qualities of fibers. Whereas when I was starting, it was just, I didn't know. And I think a lot of people don't know. So, it's changed as I've learned. And spinning is also teaching me things. Yeah.
I mean, I find that a lot, like the longer we're doing something, the more we get into the nitty-gritty of it and the more we understand. Like
Yeah.
suddenly I was knitting my first serious Fair Isle sweater and I was like, you see all of that? I don't have any non-superwash in that collection in the right colors. So I have to go and actually get like the woolly wool to work for that
Yes.
sweater. And my husband was laughing at me. He's like, are you sure like you need to buy more yarn? But like
Yes, we do.
it's like, well, I learned this new thing, And I actually
Yeah.
recently I'm working on this test knit for a friend of mine. and it's an engineering marvel. Like it's the whole thing is created with like short rows, and there is no, it's a top, lacy top, but there is like no seaming at all. It's all seamless, like the whole construction is
Oh,
seamless.
oh
And
wow.
I'm knitting it and I'm admiring the way Jerry Riggs put it together. And I'm like, how did she even think about it? Right. So I was talking to Jerry and I said, but how did she learn about it? And she said, well, it's so easy. You just take, like, you just sketch what you want to make, and then you think, how would I sew it? And I was like, well, that's great, except I'm really sewing much, you know. So
Yeah.
like the longer I'm doing it and the more projects I do, the more I realize how much I don't know and how much I want to
Yes.
learn. Like it's
Yes.
absolutely like the best thing about stuff, you know.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I'm like that too. Whatever space in my studio is not taken up with yarn is taken up with books. Like if I'm not knitting, I'm probably reading. And I think that is so true. Like there's always more to learn. But that's the great thing, I think, about what we do. You know, it never gets boring because there's always more to learn.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, those sheep. Like, how did you end up getting a farm?
Because I'm crazy.
The
No, I'm
sad
kidding.
part. Somehow we like we just you know, we talked about couple stitches of crochet and then like boom, and you're spinning your own ship. So let's go back to that story.
So we moved here in 2019. And I was sorry to leave California. You know, there was so much stuff that I love out there, and I love the ocean, and I miss that all the time. Um, but we just got to a point where between the expense and we both have parents that are getting older, and anytime something was going on, you know, it's a plane ride away. Um, so we just kind of got to the point where it was like we need to make a lifestyle change as well as a location change. Our whole family loves animals. I mean, my daughter is actually in college right now, going to school studying biology, like for a more general degree, but she wants to work with animals. But we've all always loved animals, and it was kind of just like we decided to have a hobby farm. And sheep is just such a natural thing for that to happen with us because of what I do. And I had read some books also like about people who had sheep farms and just the seasons, and it sounded so peaceful to me.
So is it
But
people?
it is peaceful. Like I love waking up early in the morning and seeing our property. Like sometimes we get deer or whatever, or sitting outside and just hearing the birds. Like I do love that part of it. Um, the flip side of it is though, like when you have animals, you do have daily care. Like the water pipes down at the barn have frozen, like when it gets cold, which thankfully it doesn't do for very long here. But when it does, you know, we've had to haul buckets of water from the house because no matter what, like you have to make sure your animals are taken care of. So that
Oh,
part is not always peaceful or fun,
how
but
many
it's
animals?
rewarding.
How many animals are we talking about?
Right now we have a very small flock, so we had 3 sheep, and we just sold our goats like a few months ago, just because so much going on in our family right now with the kids. My son is going into his senior year, and my daughter's in college. It was kind of like, you know, we just needed to scale it back for a while. Um, but we have chickens, we have the sheep, and then inside, our golden retrievers actually just had puppies. So, so we have a lot of indoor pets at the moment. But and we have rescue cats and a rescue dog that came with us from California. So
Well,
yeah,
let's
animals
talk
are a part of
about
it.
your sheep. How did you choose which breed you want?
We more well, we did it partly based on the price, because initially we thought of getting like baby doll sheep, but the price was high, and we were like, you know, we're learning, so I don't know if we want to invest that until we learn more. And we just found like a flock of sheep that were more reasonably priced, that were a mix of Shetland, Cotswold, and BFL. And so I texted my spinning friends, before we bought them, and was like, do you think that this is going to be good spinning wool? And they were like, absolutely. And I was like, all right, that's all I need to hear. So that's how we ended up with that breed.
So
But
how did you learn how to spin? Like, was that
that's been a it's been a learning curve, and it's been honestly a slower learning curve for me than knitting was. Um, I started with the drop spindle, and I feel like I'm doing pretty well with that. But the wheel, I'm still kind of struggling with. I have an Ashford traditional, so it's just single treadle. But I still struggle with that a bit. I'm still kind of spinning rope, as they say. So I would like to just maybe do some dyeing with it and make like a temperature blanket out of it or something, because I don't want to waste it. But I'm not at the point yet where I can spin like sweater quality fine knitting wool. So I might take some classes actually. I think I need some help. But
anybody's watching? I actually interviewed some people who teach spinning, so maybe they'll
oh,
connect you.
oh, okay, yes, they can reach out. The girl needs help over here.
Well, you are one woman. You knit, you crochet, you spin, you're considering dyeing, you're designing, and you're taking care of those animals. And I'm sure you do another million things. Tell me about your day. Tell me like how you manage to juggle all these balls.
Oh, well, I don't do all of that every single day. The animals actually are like a family thing. So we all take our turns doing the animal care. Um, I do get up early in the morning. I'm an early morning kind of person. I don't watch much TV because all of my relaxation is kind of the stuff that I enjoy doing. Um, I do try to eat healthy, drink my water, because taking care of yourself is what gives you energy. At least I've found. So I do try to watch my health habits so that I can have energy for all the stuff that I do. Um, but I also try to be very disciplined about it. Like just put in 15 minutes a day on practicing things if I want to get better. So, but yeah, things fall through the cracks, believe me.
Talking about taking care of your health, you are almost the black belt in martial arts, right? You
I
do.
have about a year of training left. Yes. So I
How did
take
that happen? How did you decide that you need those martial arts in your life?
well, my son has been doing it for quite some time. And of course, when he was little, I used to take him to the practice and then sit and watch. And I thought it was cool, especially when they're breaking the boards and doing stuff like that. And, he's 17 now. And I kind of just got to the point where I was like, I don't know why I don't just do it with him. It's good exercise, it's discipline, you're learning a skill. Um, and it just looks cool to me. So I did start doing it with him 2 years ago in September. So I have about another year to go, and then I should be testing for my black belt. Um, so
Are you
yeah,
very
there's
competitive between each other?
sometimes, but actually I feel really privileged because I do have him. So, when I come home from class and something didn't make sense, I can always ask him to help me, and he always knows what to do, and then he can guide me through it. And I learn a lot at home from him as well. Yeah.
Do you feel like martial arts gives you discipline to deal with like the rest of your hobbies and the rest of your work things?
It gives me pushing through, because there are a lot of nights that I don't feel like going to class, especially in the winter when it's cold. I'd rather be home knitting than dragging my butt out to a class. um, and it's one of those things that, like, you get invested in it. Like, I'm a brown belt with the black stripe now. So, I have about 2 years in. So I don't want to quit, but I'm kind of in that slog where it feels like it's forever before I get that black belt. So I have to push through. So it kind of teaches you that, because it is a big long-term goal. Like, I don't think there's any studio where you would go and just get a black belt in a year if you've never done it. So it is something that you really have to be like, that is my goal. And whatever it takes, I'm going to keep going at it until I achieve it. And it takes perseverance.
Well, you mentioned that you started designing while working in the store. Was that pattern an immediate success?
No, no. I think being a designer is tough, you know, because there's so many of us. Like everyone wants their little piece of the pie, so to speak. Although I don't like to think of it like that. I don't like to compete because I really love our community. I think, you know, every time I go to like things like H&H or whatever, I meet you or other people in the community that up until then I've only seen in magazines or on YouTube or wherever. And we're just a really great community. Like we all get along so well for the most part. Um, and you know, it's being with your people. So I always think of it as being with the people, with my people. Like we all understand each other and we have our own language.
Well,
Like I
when
can't really go talk knitting with whoever in my life. Like most people don't get it.
like no, my family is just slowly backing away anytime I start talking knitting. They disappearing real fast.
That's
You
so
want
funny.
some alone time, you just start talking about knitting and you'll see that everyone has something else to do.
That is so funny, but it's so true. Yes.
When you write a pattern and it's not immediately successful and you see other people in the industry who seemingly have it so easy and doesn't matter what they put out there, it's this huge commercial success. And I talk about it with a lot of designers, big and small, but sometimes like really famous designers, they're like, okay, I put this pattern and it was successful, and this pattern, and then suddenly it's a total flop and I can't explain why. Like I thought it's gonna do really well and it doesn't. How do you deal with that? Like how do you deal with the when the pattern doesn't sell well? Do you start analyzing where you went wrong, or do you try to think about like maybe somebody else bigger and better published something that day and that's why it went unnoticed? Do you blame algorithm? Like how do you deal with this?
I mean, first of all, I guess I do try to only put out things that I like, you know, like I'm not going to design something that I wouldn't want to wear myself. Um, because a lot of it, I think all of us are doing it out of love for our craft as much as the money. You know, I don't think you go into being a knitwear designer to be a billionaire. Like, you know, that's the tech or whatever. But you know, we don't go into knitwear design to be crazy rich. Um, so I do try to make sure that I stay focused on doing what I love. Like this is what I love. Um, I try not to compare because I think it can be such a misconception of how fast something happens for someone else. Like we don't know how much work, you know, Stephen West has put into his stuff or for how long, for example. So it looks like he's super successful, which he is. But you know, we don't know how many patterns that he had that he was disappointed in how they didn't sell or how long he's been doing what he's been doing. So I think there's an idea that someone rose really fast to success, but there's usually a backstory that we just don't know about. That's the way I look at it. Like we all have to work. There's no overnight success, despite the impression that we get sometimes. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, if you guys want to know the backstory of Stephen West, just check out his interview on my channel. We talked a lot about all the background that like nobody sees, the background work. But like
Yeah.
when you do the new pattern, do you feel like because you told the world that you're a designer, do you feel like there is this pressure that you put on yourself to come up with new patterns all the time? Like, do you feel like you have to continue to be a designer? And if you don't have any creative ideas in the moment, how do you deal with that? How do you find your inspiration?
So the first part of the question, the pressure that I usually put on myself is being original. Like it's very hard to not copy someone or to feel like you got copied. And we saw this on like the Project Runway TV show. You know, designers would complain that people copied them and whatever. But we're all being influenced by the same culture and a lot of the same things. So my process is really important to me. Like I do try to go out and go to a museum or go walking, look at nature. You know, I try to draw inspiration and then sketch things instead of looking through art that is, or not art, but like other people's design work, for example. Like I try not to look at knitting to get inspiration for my knitting, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So my process is important to me. And then as far as the second part of the question, I think that's why I try to do other stuff, you know. I remember being interviewed for a graphic design firm a long time ago, and the guy was like, you know, what do you do to stay creative besides just, you know, doing what we're hiring you to do? And I told him, like, I like to go out and try new foods or go to art museums or just try different things. And he's like, that's a good answer. Like, you should always be trying to explore the world and doing new things, because that's kind of where you do get inspiration and things don't feel so stale all the time.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I agree with that, because like I remember my oldest son was, you know, he's been a pianist since he could walk, basically. Like he's been taking classes all his life, and I remember his teacher was making him read some poetry or go to museum and look at some paintings. Like she would mention some painting and she's like, you have to go and check it out, and he would be like, what it has to do with me pressing the notes? And she said, anybody can press the notes, but not everybody can tell the story with their music, you know? So it's like you always, through your art, through your patterns, through your any creative endeavor, like you telling your story and something that you feel and something that inspired you in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, when you talk about your flock and taking care of them, what did they teach you?
Oh, what did they teach me? Oh, goodness. Well, I suppose they have taught me to be very consistent, you know, because like we were talking, they have to be taken care of twice a day. And it doesn't matter, you know, if you're sick or the weather's bad or whatever, like, you know, animals have to be fed and watered and all that stuff. And it's also taught me, I guess, like readjusting my mental space, you know, like I can be having a bad day, and it always improves when I go down to the barnyard and take care of the animals. Like even if I don't feel like it, I do feel better by the time I get back up to the house. Like animals are just they're just who they are, and you know, they're not spiteful, they're not any of those things. Like they just are who they are. They need what they need. They're consistently the same thing day after day. And you know, they're relaxing to be around. So I usually, like if I go down to the barnyard and I'm in a bad mood or something's just not going right, you know, I have to be really mindful that I'm not going to go down there and then take it out on them, you know, like I'm not going to go yell at the sheep. So it is a good thing to have to just reset your mental space, even though, you know, it does get monotonous some days.
You mentioned that like your family members help you take care of the animals, that it's a family affair. Do you feel like it brought you closer together?
Yes and no. Like sometimes it is a battle with the kids, like, you know, they get tired of doing it.
Okay.
And you know, I try to be very mindful that I'm not putting responsibility onto them that, you know, my husband and I chose to take on. But on the other hand, I think it's a good thing for them to learn as well. You know, when you're dealing with animals, or you're dealing with things that are very dependent on the seasons, you also come to appreciate the seasons. Like we kind of enjoy things together as well. Like fall is usually a time to, like, you know, get the barn ready for winter. And we have what we call farm days, where we do just set aside like a Saturday, and then we will go out there and do whatever needs to be done, like shovel the barn out or repair fencing or things like that. Like whatever needs to be done. Yeah. But it can be really refreshing, even though it's technically manual labor. But
Well, when you do your patterns, when you plan the next design, like, do you look at it as a chore as well? Like, is any part of designing not pleasurable and you just have to get through it?
yes, I enjoy the conceptualizing part. Like I enjoy sketching out the idea, thinking through how I'm going to make it and that sort of thing. Um, but I do find the pattern writing to be tedious sometimes, or just the proofreading, all the little technical things that you have to do to get it published. The photography also stresses me out sometimes because I'm usually my own model. So I don't really want to be a model, but any designer knows how that goes. I mean, we got to do what we got to do. We wear a lot of hats. So not all of us have hokey locatelli to model our designs.
It was just in the right time and the right place. Or I don't know. We're still talking about that.
Yes.
She was very, very kind, and like she was like, it would be my pleasure, and
Oh, yes.
good.
Well,
So
and I did listen to your interview with her, and she said she hates modeling her stuff too.
right.
So I was like, okay, I'm not the only one.
No, I think we all do. Like, part of us hates to hear our voice or see our face like out there, but it's also people get to know you and they want to feel like they know you to buy your
Yeah.
pattern, because like as you mentioned, there are so many designers out there. It has to
Mhm.
act on more. Sometimes people buy a pattern because they really like the design, but more often than not they buy the pattern because they connect to your story and want to
Yeah,
support you, right?
yes. And that probably has been the hardest thing for me. Like when you were talking about whether or not things were successful or not, marketing, has been the big struggle for me because I would rather just be in my studio designing and doing my creative work. I really hate having to sell. And, I try to be very low key about selling, but if you're going to market yourself, you do have to sell a little bit. And I don't like that part.
Well, I find that like oftentimes what we consider selling might not necessarily be selling. Like sometimes you can just, if people test knit for you and they share their work, that might sell more than you actually going and saying, buy my pattern, or like
That's
showing,
true.
right?
Yes.
So sometimes
Yep.
it just has to be like a little bit creative approach as to how you show your work to the world.
True. Yes.
Well,
Very
what's your favorite, like what's your least favorite thing? Like if you could be a designer and somebody else would be helping you with it, like what would you give away? What parts of the process would you give away? Would it be the writing, the pattern writing?
It might be the pattern refining. Like I don't mind taking the notes as I'm knitting and figuring out how to do the pattern, like writing all that down. I don't mind doing that. But when it comes time to like, really put that pattern together, and if there's schematics or charts or um, just any of the stuff that you have to put into a pattern to make it complete. If I could turn all that over to someone, I'd be happy to.
Well, when you write a pattern, are you concerned with difficulty level of it? Because like I noticed there are some designers that they just don't care how difficult something is. They have a vision of some design, right? And it's gonna be a complete like logistical nightmare to write that pattern down and to grade it. But and you'll have to learn like every technique under the sun, right, to be able to knit it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's their idea and their vision for the pattern. And then there are people who like extremely scared that like people not gonna buy the pattern and knit their pattern because it's too complicated, and they'll stick to like very simple accessories, something for like beginners or like beginner
Yeah.
yet. Do you concern yourself with that, or do you just go with the idea and whatever technique needs to be learned for that pattern is on the knitter?
I guess my concern, or I guess my focus when I've been writing patterns, has been making sure that I'm clear. So it's not always bad to have a more challenging pattern, because some knitters want to be challenged. So that's just a matter of like who your customer is, really. Um, but it's always my concern to make sure that I have written the pattern clearly so that whatever it is, like whatever the photograph is, the knitter is able to follow my instructions and produce that, you
Right.
know. And when you're so close to something, sometimes it's really hard to think through like how to write that so that someone who's never done it before is gonna be able to follow your instructions. And because there's nothing more frustrating than you're up half the night trying to figure out why this thing isn't working, and then you realize the designer just didn't write the pattern clearly, or they made a mistake, and like, man, you wasted all my time and it
Well,
wasn't even me.
you want to know my biggest recent frustration. So this lady who never knitted lace, because I told everybody that this pattern that I wrote is for the beginners in lace, she decided to give it a try, and she got to the SSK and she slipped, and then she knitted the third stitch because because nobody said that it's those two stitches through the back loop. So there's a lot of assumptions that you as a knitter, it's so obvious to you that you didn't think that somebody can stumble on that. But if a person is new to knitting or new to that kind of patterns, it might be completely new technique to them, and they just read it,
Yeah,
what it says.
yeah, yep, that's so true. And we can think about that and really try to consider the person that's going to be knitting the pattern that we made. But I don't know if we can always avoid every situation like that,
Right.
because I mean, there's no standard for things either in the knitting world, so a lot of it has to do with how someone perceives what you wrote, and a lot of it has to do with us thinking those things through. But I mean, that's why designers provide pattern support as well, because sometimes there is just something like that you know you just have to clear it up for someone. And I remember back when I first started knitting, I was having problems with purling. And then finally one day, another knitter in the shop looked at what I was doing, and I have no idea what I was doing now, but somehow I was like twisting. I was twisting the purl.
Mhm.
And so the next row, then that would cause problems. And I'm so grateful to her for clearing that up, because otherwise, I had no idea. Like, how would I really progress in my knitting if I couldn't even purl properly, But I just needed someone to explain that little detail to me. And so I'm always happy to do that for someone else as well, because
Right. I mean,
it can be
that's
so
the beauty of
frustrating.
it again. Like we said at the beginning, that like there is never you can never know everything, but
Yes,
because there is so much to learn. So you can't, doesn't matter if you've been knitting for a year or 10 years, you're still going to be learning something new every time.
that's true. Yes. And our community is usually very gracious with each other. Like, we love to help other people learn, which I think is great.
Well,
Yeah.
talking of community, how did your life change discovering knitting community? Like if you think of yourself 15 years ago before you took that hook in hand, and you think of yourself now, what changed?
Um, I think it is just having the community. Whereas before, it was kind of like I had this creative energy, but I wasn't really, I didn't have a satisfying place to put it, you
Right.
know? And then it's like once I started getting involved with the knitting community and got into it, it was like, those are my people. Like, we get each other. And I always feel that way. I mean, you can just go into almost any group. Well, here's an example. So back in California, before we moved here, and I was homeschooling my kids, um, I started them in this like new homeschool group. And it was like the first day I walk in, it's this huge room and there's moms everywhere, and everybody knows everybody except for me, of course. And, you know, that's always intimidating for any of us. And so I ended up, you know, taking just a second to compose myself. And then I noticed that there was this table with some women sitting there knitting. And I was like, that is it. That's where I got to go. And, you know, who else has that? Like, I don't know if anybody else has that. Like, you know, if people are super into playing soccer or something, you don't necessarily just walk in a room and find your people, but we do. So,
What are you working on now? Is there anything exciting coming up?
actually, yes, my word for the year was collaboration, because I realized like I have been in my studio so much and I start getting a little antsy, like I'm just by myself too much and I
Right.
need people to like bounce things off of. And I like people anyway. Like I want to do things with people, not just by myself. So I joined this women's business group that's like local here where I live. And there was a local author in there. She writes like mysteries and thrillers. And then at H&H America, I met a dyer that does like all these colorways based on books. And then of course, you know, I have my local yarn shop, which is my happy place. And so I thought it would be really cool to do a collaboration where the author might come in and do a reading or something. Like everybody reads her books and the dyer does the custom colors. I do the design work. And then of course the yarn shop is the host place for all these things. And it has been a really fun thing. Like I
It's
love the collaboration and
yeah.
yeah. So we're just getting all that sorted out. Like it's not, I don't have anything to post for it yet, but it's something that all of us are really excited about. Like the author was like, I think this is one of the coolest things I've ever done. Like I never knew knitters would be interested in my books. And, you know, it's also kind of a way for all of us to do what we do best and support each other at the same time. So yeah, that is a project I'm very excited about. Yeah.
That's such a great idea. I might
Thank you.
have to find some local author and see if we can do something similar here in my
It would be
neighborhood.
fun. I have yet to meet a knitter that doesn't like to read. So
You know, or animals. Like it's usually all comes together.
yes, yep.
Well, I'm so glad that we got to meet at H&H, and I'm sure we'll run into each other again at some
Oh,
other
I hope
fiber
so.
festival. Yeah.
I do hope so.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for being my guest today. It was a pleasure to have you on my channel.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.